The Journal of Henry Holdsworth, detective into demonic deeds and dark disdain. Life in the Spanish hills is extremely difficult for the crew of the Whitby. When one is used to a seaboard existence, being stuck in the horrid heat whilst a war is being fought all around us can try the patience of saints, and the crew of the Whitby are far from godly. Thankfully, after weeks of solitude, we received a message that a government agent would meet us at an old mission church in an overgrown forest not far from where we were camped. The agent would wear a signet ring engraved with a silver bayonet, and it would prove invaluable in the war against Napoleon's legions and other darker foes. Midshipman Mansfield growled and ordered us to advance upon the church as the moon gleamed high in the sky. As we approached the long-forgotten village, Mansfield ordered us to take cover in the forest near the old stone road. Marine Swanson passed his telescope to Mansfield, who refused it, saying that he could see well in the dark. He gleamed into the gloom and, returning to us, seemed irritated and aloof. He told us the agent was dead. His body had been torn apart and was laying on the old stone road near the church door. Mansfield slumped down into the ditch which we were resting and told us the village was infested by grim, gutter-looking goblins who had emerged from nearby tunnels to loot and deface the village and the church. I looked through my notes and found a piece I had written on just such creatures, and warned the crew that their very countenance could cause weapons and machinery to malfunction. I asked the crew to stay away from the devils and fire from afar. I don't think anybody was listening. Suddenly, a shout rang out, followed by a shot, and the crew rushed into action. Everyone by now was used to and familiar with their battlefield role, and I just hobbled after the others, really, my head down and my heart beating like a marching drum. Gunfire racked the air. The French had arrived. Mansfield was moving like a wild animal, rushing forward through the trees with Swooping Hawk and Sailor Shenkin, trying their damnedest to keep up with him. He vaulted over the wall near the church and, dodging bullets that rent through the night, I watched with horror as he bit the finger off the dead agent and spat the signet ring into his own hand, whilst swallowing what was left of the finger. Turning in triumph, he held up the ring and shouted, before being obscured by smoke, from the French who had snuck up from behind the back of the church. Mansfield hit the ground hard, and I saw the ring roll along the stone road before coming to a stop and glowing in the moonlight. Then the goblins arrived. Gibbling and growling in their gruff tongue, they dived into combat with the Whitby crew, crude weapons crushing down on the sailors, whose guns did not seem to work. I glimpsed the sailor Shenkin fall to the ground, and the French were also firing off withering shots into the air around me. All looked to be lost. I saw Swooping Hawk run out into the road to try and grab the ring, but he fell to the ground, clutching his arm, and crawled along the churchyard floor. I suddenly felt weak like a baby, as if I had been cursed. I looked around and could only see myself and the Marine Swanson still standing, as the French loomed out of the mist to grab the ring and do battle with the grinning goblins. I knew that in the past I had let both myself and my colleagues down with my lack of courage. I saw myself partly responsible for the death of my beloved Gabriella, and I took the deepest of breaths and ran out towards the gleaming ring. Although the distance was only a few yards, it felt like miles as shot after shot rang out around me. A goblin leapt out and swung at me with a rusty blade, and at the last moment I tripped and fell to the earth, and what must have been the grace of God found the ring in my hand as I lay in the earth. I turned over and knew that my life was over. Out of the mist, the French officer who has been the cause of so much pain for the crew of the Whitby, the one known as Piece de Merde. He rushed out with his sabre, aiming for my heart. I could only sit and watch, but suddenly he stumbled over Mansfield's prone leg, and and tumbled to the ground with his sword snapping right in front of me. I stood up as 3 of his followers loomed and lifted their guns to fire at me. Gripping the ring in my hand, I closed my eyes and prayed for God's assistance. I knew my life was over. Click, click, click. All 3 shots miraculously misfired. Whether it was the mystic miasma of the goblin interfering with the technology or some angel's hand on my shoulder, I don't know. I took the blessing for what it was, and I turned and I ran through the woods. What shots were ringing out around me as I fled the battlefield. Saved by a miracle. With the ring in my grasp, I ran through the trees. I could feel shots ringing out. I could feel the curses of the French. But I was safe. Hours later, as the sun began to rise, the wounded crew gathered at our fire pit. Only Schenkin had not returned, and Mansfield, who was now limping quite badly after the French officer had fallen on him, had returned alone to try and find him. I examined the ring, which seemed to glow in the firelight, the silver bayonet shining upon it. Suddenly there was a sound, and Mansfield limped into camp, and everyone looked up in hope and expectation. "He's dead," said Mansfield. One of those creatures must have carried him off before he got there, I thought, and all of us looked at each other in shocked silence, for Mansfield's mouth was caked in blood.